Hi folks, it's John from lastchanceautorestore.com. This is basically part 2 of the video that I'd like to share with you. This is the 1950 Dodge half-ton short bed step-side pickup truck. In an earlier video we shared with you basically the client who owns this truck. It was built elsewhere, and it was built 3 or 4 years ago. And he had some drivability issues. There were some concerns with the shifting, and it was popping out of first and not very drivable, so there's some problem with the linkage and shifting. And then he basically would like to have the truck checked over. So in our earlier video when we had the truck outside, we kind of showed you what was going on with the height of the rear, where one side was taller than the other. And we noticed some oil leaks when it was in our trailer. We picked it up in our enclosed trailer, and there was quite a few oil droppings. So we basically did a basic look of the truck, and it is gorgeous. It's a really nice red color, beautiful contrast with the black and chrome trim. So what I'd like to do is just share with you and our client, because he lives quite far away, I'd like to share what we have found so far with this Dodge on the underside of the truck. So we're at the very front, obviously, underneath the radiator and your mounting points for the rad. So if we start here, I think the camera can probably pick it up. There's quite a bit of oil leaking, and that's more than seepage. It's basically been dripping for a while. You can see on the floor here, we just put it on the hoist, and you can see there's droplets here and here. And then we have quite a bit coming from the back, and we've got this pile here. Now it always looks worse on a cement floor, but this truck has been on the hoist for a few hours, and we have that much on the floor. So basically we're just going to kind of go through and just share what we see underneath. So in terms of detail, this is going to be a vehicle that our client's going to drive. So you can see it's quite decent underneath. We've got some black, like rocker guard stuff that's been sprayed. There is some new hardware here that's holding up the mounts for the shocks, and we have fairly new shocks. They look like a Napa brand, decent quality shocks. There's nothing to be concerned about there, but mostly from sitting, I believe. So when you look under from that side that the camera is on, you can see this oil pan, and there's a gasket that's there that obviously goes all the way around the bottom of the engine. There's a lot of leaking here, and I think the camera, I don't know if I'm going to have the wrong lighting, but there's a seal there in the front, and you can see there's quite a bit still dripping there, and it's dripping off of that location. It's coming down and then dripping again. So I believe it's probably the front seal of the oil pan, and then we have a lot of seepage. It looks like an old style oil pan gasket. So there's a lot of seepage, and it's basically starts here. It's quite dry, but from the second bolt all the way along towards the front, and as you get to the front it's worse. But they've got a new fuel filter and fuel pump up above, and new fuel lines, which you really like. We're looking at the bottom. You can see the exhaust system. It's a new exhaust pipe, and it's been properly bent, and then it comes up and it meets the exhaust manifold, and that exhaust manifold unfortunately hasn't been treated at all. You can see it's quite rusty, where typically we would want, when it's all apart, you would want to sandblast it and then treat it with like a ceramic coating, and we would typically do like a cast iron type of coating on it. But that's more of a personal choice thing. When it's off, you'd want to deal with that as opposed to leaving it unprotected and exposed with nothing helping it along. As we come over to pardon me, over to the driver's side here, this is where we have probably I would say my first major concern. So this is our steering box. It's a non-power steering truck, and you can see the bottom of this shaft, the steering shaft where it meets the idler. We've got a lot of fluid that's leaking and dripping from the bottom stock of the seal. And then this is a little bit peculiar. We have wires that are coming out. Normally what happens, or what should be here, is there's an adjustable threaded bolt and a locking nut, and you adjust the worm gear inside there. But we've got these wires, and I'm not sure, I think they're probably using wire to try and take up the play or the slack in the worm gear. So this steering box has a tremendous amount of play in it, and not too much happens. It's okay for lot driving, just in the parking lot, but the steering box has excessive wear and wouldn't be very safe to drive in this condition. So we've located a replacement steering box for it. That's going to make the steering quite a bit better. And then as we come, we're going to watch our heads on this, on the original beam coming across the front. And then as we come to where the engine and transmission meet, you can see the rear main seal is leaking a little more than seepage. It's fairly common to have fluid leaking there, but you can see it's dripping quite a bit. And then as we come to the back, you can see they've done some work to the transmission and clean it up and have some paint on it and so on. And the back here, we've got quite a bit of leaking going on at the tailstock. So I think the camera can pick it up, and that's why that's our biggest puddle right now, that's leaking on the floor. And you can see here, we've got quite a bit of fluid still seeping out. So it's coming out from the gasket in behind here, running down, and then it's continually dripping. So we'd want to look into that to see what's going on. You can see the bottom of the floor is really nice, very well protected. Overall, everything is nice. Like it's greasy and grimy in certain spots and a lot of surface rust, but it's a vehicle that our client wants to enjoy. It's been in the family, I believe, its whole life, so they want to be able to drive it and enjoy it. So, you know, having some rocker guard and stuff sprayed along, I don't see any issues with it. So everything looks, other than the oil leaking in the front, I think the camera person can probably pick it up. There's a bolt missing in the back here. Not that big of a deal, but so the wiring is tied back and everything is quite decent there. And as we follow the frame and we come down here towards the back area, this is where we have some concerns. So here's our gas tank coming along the side, and then where our two jack points are on the hoist, where it comes across this beam. This cross member support piece that's running along here is the main support piece for the frame of this truck that's bolted to the sides, both driver and passenger side. Now you can see we've got some holes here, and this is corrosion that's rotted through, and I can fit, you know, part of my finger in here and in through these holes. We'll probably share with you another video, because underneath where the mounting point, this was the safest point to lift the truck on the hoist, but where this beam comes across and meets the frame, there's large holes like this that's corroded in that area. So it looks like they've done some type of repair work here for an exhaust hanger, but I'm kind of concerned why they left these rusted holes across the frame. You can see another concern I have is right here. I think the camera can pick it up. This is where the subframe or cross member comes across. There's two pieces welded together from the factory, and you can see it's cracked and split open, and it's crawled back this far. So to me, that's a concern. So there's some flexing or movement because it's allowing that bottom plate to split and pull away. So that should be dealt with, this cross member being in such condition now. The craziest thing of all, I was trying to figure out in our earlier video, and it's these shocks, and I think the camera person can probably pick it up best turning around. So we'll trade spots here. So you can see these shocks, and this is kind of mind-boggling. I've never seen it before. You've got such a pretty looking truck and all this work and new exhaust system, and then we look at these shocks, and I was quite disturbed by what I saw. So you can see these are some type of aftermarket shock, and there's a coil on the outside. Some people would call them a cheater spring. But then if you look at the top here, we have a muffler clamp on the top around the cylinder, and it's collapsed against the shock. And the bottom, we have another muffler clamp, and it's clamped to the bottom. So shocks for this truck, a nice gas charged shock, I think are roughly $40 a piece. And it's mind-boggling, and you can see the height on this cylinder compared to the height on this cylinder. You can see the difference. That would explain, I believe that's our main concern or problem with why the passenger rear wheel is roughly 2 inches taller than the driver's side. So what we need to do, we'll have to get our client's permission, is to remove these silly shocks and put the proper shocks designed for this truck, because our leaf springs look to be in very nice condition. All the clamps are in the appropriate positions. We have new flex line and all new lines, but that would explain why the truck in our earlier video, why the stance, when we had our measuring tape, why it seems so wonky, and I couldn't figure out why is it sitting like that, because it's sitting crooked. So it's these shocks that are worn out, not made for this truck, and then using muffler clamps to try and hold them in position, and there's been some shifting or moving. They've moved around, and our client recalls hearing on his first test drive a big clunk coming out of the back, so I would suspect that's what the client heard. The other thing, we haven't pulled the wheels off. We pulled the wheels off to do a brief inspection, but you can see, and it's just from sitting, this is the back of the passenger rear wheel, and there's a wheel cylinder on the opposite side of this plate, and you can see we have leaking brake fluid. So this is fairly common when a vehicle sits for a period of time and then you apply the brakes and put some pressure on the system. Sometimes the cylinders or the seals on the end of the cylinders, because they were dry and then there's pressure, they'll start to leak, and we've got quite a bit of leaking. So you can see all of this residue around the rim. This rear wheel cylinder has been leaking for quite some time. So every time you apply the brake, you're going to get fluid, brake fluid coming out, and that's why there's so much on this wheel. And then we come over to this driver's side rear, and it's the same thing. We have quite a bit of fluid. You can see it here. There's quite a bit of brake fluid leaking off and down. So we'll have to locate a couple of wheel cylinders, and you can see it's leaking so much that the rib of the rim is filling with brake fluid. So very, very nice truck visually. There's some good and bad, nothing really that bad, but we should probably deal with not only the wheel cylinders, the leaking in the front and the rear shocks, but we should probably examine a little bit closer that cross member frame. So this is the underside of the truck we shared with you earlier. This is the 1950 Dodge half-ton truck. I thank you for watching. I'm John from lastchanceautorestore.com.